Memoirs of David Brainerd. This is chapter 5, which has been broken down into 3 parts. This is part 3 of 3. Upon this spiritual sensation, being awakened comes in and declares that she now feels and tastes that the Lord is gracious, that He is the only supreme good, the only soul-satisfying happiness, that He is a complete, self-sufficient, and almighty portion. She whispers, "Whom have I in heaven but this God, this dear and blessed portion? And there is none upon earth I desire besides Him. Oh, it is heaven to please Him, to be just what He would have me to be. Oh, that my soul were holy as God is holy. Oh, that it were pure as Christ is pure, and perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. These are the sweetest commands in God's book, compromising all others. And shall I break them? Must I break them? Am I under a fatal necessity of it, as long as I live in this world? Oh, my soul, woe is me that I am a sinner, because I now necessarily grieve and offend this blessed God, who is infinite in goodness and grace. Oh, methinks should He punish me for my sins, I would not wound my heart so deep as to offend Him. But though I sin continually, He continually repeats His kindness towards me. Oh, methinks I could bear any suffering, but how could I bear to grieve and dishonor this blessed God? Oh, how shall I give 10,000 times more honor to Him? What shall I do to glorify and worship this best of beings? Oh, that I could consecrate myself, soul and body, to His service forever. Oh, that I could give up myself to Him, so as never more to attempt to be my own, or to have any will or affection that are not perfectly conformed to His. But, oh, alas, I feel I cannot be thus entirely devoted to God. I cannot live and sin not. O ye angels, do ye glorify Him incessantly. If possible, exert yourselves still more in more lively and ardent devotion. If possible, prostrate yourselves still lower before the throne of the blessed King of heaven. I long to bear a part with you, and if it were possible to live to help you. Yet when we have done, we shall not be able to offer the 10,000th part of the homage He is worthy of. While spiritual sensations whispered these things, fear and jealousy were greatly overcome, and the soul replied, "Now I know, and I am assured," etc. And again it welcomed death as a friend, saying, "O death, where is thy sting?" etc. Number 15. Finally, holy resolution concludes the discourse in fixedly determining to follow hard after God and continually to pursue a life of conformity to Him. And the better to pursue this and joining it, on the soul always to remember that God is the only source of happiness, that His will is the only rule of vicissitude to an intelligent creature, that earth has nothing in it desirable for itself, or any further than God is seen in it, and that the knowledge of God in Christ, begetting and maintaining love and mortifying sensual and fleshly appetites, is the way to be holy on earth, and so to be unattempered to the complete holiness of the heavenly world. Unquote. Quote, February 4th. Enjoyed some degree of freedom and spiritual refreshment. Was unable to pray with some fervency and longing desires of Zion's prosperity. And to my faith and hope seemed to take hold of God for the performance of what I was enabled to plead for. Sanctification in myself and the ingathering of God's elect were all my desire, and the hope of their accomplishment all my joy. Lord's Day, February 5th, was enabled in some measure to rest and confide in God, and to prize His presence in some glimpses of the light of His constancy above my necessary food. Found myself, after the season of weakness, temptation, and desertion I endured the last week, to be somewhat like Samson, when his locks began to grow again. Was unable to preach to my people with more life and warmth than I have for some weeks past. February 6th. This morning my soul again was strengthened in God, and found some sweet repose in Him in prayer, longing especially for the complete mortification of sensuality and pride, and for resignation to God's dispensations at all times, as, through grace, I felt it at this time. I do not desire deliverance from any difficulty that attends my circumstances, unless God was willing. Oh, how comfortable is this temper, spent most of the day in reading God's Word, in writing and prayer, enjoyed repeated and frequent comfort and tenderness of soul and prayer through the day. In the evening, spend some hours in private conversations with my people, and afterwards felt some warmth in secret prayer. February 7th. Was much engaged in some sweet meditations on the powers and affections of the godly soul in the pursuit of their beloved object. Wrote something of the native language of spiritual sensation in its soft and tender whispers, declaring that it now feels and tastes that the Lord is gracious, that He is the supreme good, the only soul-satisfying happiness, that He is the complete, sufficient, and almighty portion, saying, Whom have I in heaven but Thee? And there is none upon earth that I desire besides this blessed portion. Oh, I feel that it is heaven to please Him, and to be just what He would have me to be. Oh, that my soul were holy as He is holy. Oh, that it were pure, even as Christ is pure, and perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. These, I feel, are the sweetest commands in God's book, comprising all others. And shall I break them? Must I break them? Am I under the necessity of it as long as I live in the world? O my soul, woe is me, that I am a sinner, because I now necessarily grieve and offend this blessed God, who is infinite in goodness and grace. O methinks, if He would punish me for my sins, He would not wound my heart so deep to offend Him. But though I sin continually, that He continually repeats His kindness to me. O methinks I could bear any sufferings. But how can I bear to grieve and dishonor this blessed God? How shall I yield 10,000 times more honor to Him? What shall I do to glorify and worship this best of beings? Or that I could consecrate myself, soul and body, to His service forever. Or that I could give up myself to Him, so as never more to attempt to be my own, or to have any will or affection that are not perfectly conformed to Him. But alas, I find I cannot be thus entirely devoted to God. I cannot live and not sin. O ye angels, do ye glorify Him incessantly, and if possible, prostrate yourselves lower before the blessed King of heaven. I long to bear a part with you, and if it were possible to help you. Oh, when we have done all that we can, to all eternity we shall not be able to offer the 10,000th part of the homage which the glorious God deserves. Felt something spiritual, devout, resigned, and mortified to the world much of the day, and especially towards and in the evening. Blessed be God that He has enabled me to love Him for Himself. February 8th. Was in a comfortable frame of soul most of the day, though sensible of and restless under spiritual barrenness. I find that both mind and body are quickly tired with intenseness and fever in the things of God, so that I could be as incessant as angels in devotion and spiritual fever. February 9th. Observe this day as a day of fasting and prayer, entreating of God to bestow upon me His blessing and grace, especially to enable me to live a life of mortification to the world, as well as of resignation and patience. Enjoyed some realizing sense of divine power and goodness of prayer several times, and was unable to roll the burden of myself and friends and Zion upon the goodness and grace of God, but in the general was more dry and barren than I have usually been of late upon such occasions. February 10th. Was exceedingly oppressed most of the day with shame, grief, and fear, under a sense of my past folly as well as present barrenness and coldness. When God sets before me my past misconduct, especially any instances of misguided zeal, it sinks my soul into shame and confusion, makes me afraid of a shaking leaf. My fear is such as the prophet Jeremiah complains of, Jeremiah 20:10. I have no confidence to hold up my face even before my fellow worms, but only when my soul confides in God and I find the sweet temper of Christ, the spirit of humility, solemnity, in mortification and resignation alive in my soul, but in the evening was unexpectedly refreshed in pouring out my complaint to God. My shame and fear was turned into a sweet composure and acquiescence in God. February the 11th, felt much as yesterday, enjoyed but little sensible communion with God. Lord's Day, February 12th. My soul seemed to confide in God and to repose itself on Him, and had intense longings after God in prayer. Enjoyed some divine assistance in the forenoon in preaching, but in the afternoon was more perplexed with shame, etc. Afterwards found some relief from prayer. Loved, as a feeble, afflicted, despised creature, to cast myself on a God of infinite grace and goodness, hoping for no happiness but from Him. February 13th, was calm and sedate in the morning devotions, and my soul seemed to rely on God. Rode to Stockbridge and enjoyed some comfortable meditations by the way. Had a more refreshing taste and relish of heavenly blessedness than I have enjoyed for many months past. I have many times of late felt as ardent desires of holiness as ever, but not so much sense of the sweetness and unspeakable pleasure of the enjoyments and employments of heaven. My soul longed to leave earth and bear a part with angels in their celestial employments. My soul said, Lord, it is good to be here, and it appeared to be better to die than to lose the relish of these heavenly delights. A sense of divine things seemed to continue with him in a lesser degree through the next day. On Wednesday, he was, by some discourse which he heard, cast into a melancholy gloom, but operated much in the same manner as his melancholy had formerly done, when he came first to Anonymity, the efforts of which seemed to continue in some degree the 6 following days. February 22nd, quote, in the morning, had as clear a sense of the exceeding pollution of my nature as ever I remember to have had in my life. I then appeared to myself inexpressibly loathsome and defiled, sins of childhood, of early youth, and such follies as I had not thought of for years together, as I remember, came now fresh to my view, as if committed but yesterday, and appeared in the most odious colors. They appeared more in number than the hairs of my head. Yea, they went over my head as a heavy burden. In the evening, the hand of faith seemed to be strengthening God. My soul seemed to rest and acquiesce in Him, was supported under my burdens, reading the 125th Psalm, and found that it was sweet and comfortable to lean on God. February 23rd, was frequent in prayer, and enjoyed some assistance. There is a God in heaven who overrules all things for the best, and this is the comfort of my soul. I have fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of God in the land of the living, notwithstanding present sorrows. In the evening, enjoyed some freedom in prayer for myself, friends, and the Church of God. February 24th, was exceedingly restless and perplexed under a sense of missed improvement of time. Mourned to see time passed away, felt in the greatest hurry, seemed to have everything to do, yet could do nothing, but only grieve and groan under my ignorancy, unprofitableness, meanness, the foolishness of my actions and thoughts, and pride and bitterness of some past frames, all which at this time appeared to me in lively colors, and filled me with shame. I could not compose my mind to any profitable studies by reason of this pleasure. And the reason I judge why I am not allowed to study a great part of my time is because I am endeavoring to lay in such a stock of knowledge as shall be a self-sufficiency. I know it to be my indispensable duty to study and qualify myself in the best manner I can for public service. But this is my misery. I naturally study and prepare that I may consume it upon my lust of pride and self-confidence. Unquote. He continued in much the same frame of uneasiness at the misimprovement of time and pressure of spirit under a sense of vileness, unprofitableness, etc., for the 6 following days, excepting some intervals of calmness and composure and resignation to and confidence in God. Quote, March 2nd, was most of the day employed in writing on a divine subject, was frequent in prayer, and enjoyed some small degree of assistance. But in the evening, God was pleased to grant me divine sweetness in prayer, especially in the duty of intercession. I think I never felt so much kindness and love to those who I have reason to think are my enemies, though at that time I found such a disposition to think the best of all that I scarce knew how to think that any such thing as enmity and hatred lodged in my soul. It seemed as if all the world must needs be friends, and never prayed with more freedom and delight for myself or dearest friend than I did now for my enemies. March 3rd. In the morning spent, I believe, an hour in prayer with great intenseness and freedom, and with the most soft and tender affection towards mankind. I longed that those who, I have reason to think, only ill will might be eternally happy. It seemed refreshing to think of meeting them in heaven, how much soever they had injured me on earth, had no disposition to insist upon any confession from them in order to reconciliation and the exercise of love and kindness to them. Oh, it is an emblem of heaven itself, to love all the world with the love of kindness, forgiveness, and benevolence, to feel our souls sedate, mild, and meek, to be void of all evil surmising and suspicions, and scarce able to think evil of any man upon any occasion, to find our hearts simple, open, and free to those that look upon us with a different eye. Prayer was so sweet an exercise to me that I knew not how to cease, lest I should lose the spirit of prayer. Felt no disposition to eat or drink for the sake of the pleasure of it, but only to support my nature and fit me for the divine service. Could not be content without a very particular mention of a great number of dear friends at the throne of grace, as also the particular circumstances of many so far as they were known. Lord's Day, March 4th. In the morning, enjoyed the same intenseness in prayer as yesterday morning, though not in so great a degree. Felt the same spirit of love, universal benevolence, forgiveness, humility, resignation, mortification to the world, and the composure of mind as then. My soul rested in God, and I found I wanted no other refuge or friend. While my soul thus trusts in God, all things seem to be at peace with me, even the stones of the earth. But when I cannot apprehend and confide in God, all things appear with a different aspect, unquote. Through the 4 next days, he complains of barrenness and holy confidence in God, stupidity, wandering of mind, etc., and speaks of oppression of mind under a sense of exceeding meanness, past follies, as well as present workings of corruption. On Friday, he seems to have been restored to a considerable degree of the same excellent frame, which he enjoyed the Saturday before. Quote, March 10th. In the morning, felt exceeding dead to the world in all its enjoyments. I thought I was ready and willing to give up life and all its comforts as soon as called to it, and yet then had as much comfort of life as almost ever I had. Life itself now appeared to be an empty bubble. The riches, honors, and common enjoyments of life appeared extremely tasteless. I longed to be perpetually and entirely crucified to all things here below by the cross of Christ. My soul was sweetly resigned to God's disposal of me in every regard, and I saw that nothing had happened but what was best for me. I confide in God that He would never leave me, though I should, quote, walk through the valley of the shadow of death, unquote. It was then my meat and drink to be holy, to live to the Lord, and die to the Lord. And I thought that I then enjoyed such a heaven as far exceeded the most sublime conceptions of an unregenerated soul, and even unspeakably beyond what I myself could conceive of at another time. I did not wonder that Peter said, quote, Lord, it is good to be here, unquote, when thus refreshed with divine glories. My soul was full of love and tenderness in the duty of intercession, especially felt a most sweet affection to some precious godly ministers of my acquaintance, prayed earnestly for dear Christians, and for those I have reason to fear are my enemies, and could not have spoken a word of bitterness or entertained a bitter thought against the vilest man living. Had a sense of my own great unworthiness, My soul seemed to breathe forth love and praise to God afresh, when I thought he would let his children love and receive me as one of their brethren and fellow citizens. When I thought of their treating me in that manner, I longed to lay at their feet, and could think of no way to express the sincerity and simplicity of my love and esteem for them, as being much better than myself. Towards night was very sorrowful, seemed to myself the worst creature living, and could not pray, nor meditate, nor think of holding up my face before the world. Was a little relieved in prayer in the evening, but longed to get on my knees and ask forgiveness of everybody that ever had seen anything amiss in my past conduct, especially in my religious zeal. Was afterwards much perplexed, so that I could not sleep quietly. Lord's Day, March 11th. My soul was in some measure strengthened in God in morning devotion, so that I was released from trembling fear and distress. Preached to my people from the parable of the sower, Matthew 13, and enjoyed some assistance both parts of the day. Had some freedom, affection, and fervency in addressing my poor people. Longed that God should take hold of their hearts and make them spiritually alive. And indeed I had so much to say to them that I knew not how to leave off speaking." Unquote. This was the last Sabbath in which he ever performed public service at Kana Unik, and these the last sermons which he ever preached there. It appears by his diary that while he continued with these Indians, he took great pains with them, and did it with much discretion, but the particular manner how has been omitted for brivity's sake. Quote, March 12th, in the morning, was in a devout, tender, and loving frame of mind, and was enabled to cry to God, I hope, with a childlike spirit, with importunity, resignation, and composure of mind. My spirit was full of quietness and love to mankind, and longed that peace should reign on earth. Was grieved at the very thought of a fierce, angry, and intemperate zeal in religion, mourned over past follies in that regard, and confided in God for strength and grace sufficient for my future work and trials. Spent the day mainly in hard labor, making preparation for my intended journey. March 13th. Felt my soul going forth after God sometimes, but not with such ardency as I desired. In the evening was enabled to continue instant in prayer for some considerable time together, and especially had respect to the journey I designed to enter upon, with the leave of divine providence on the morrow. Enjoyed some freedom and fervency, entreating the divine presence might attend me in every place where my business might lead me, and had a particular reference to the trials and temptations to which I apprehend I might be more eminently exposed in particular places. Was strengthened and comforted, although I was before very weary. Truly, the joy of the Lord is strength and life. March 14th. Enjoyed some intenseness of soul and prayer, repeating my petitions for God's presence in every place where I expected to be in my journey. Besought the Lord that I might not be too much pleased and amused with dear friends and acquaintances in one place and another. Near 10 set out on my journey, and near night came to Stockbridge. March 15th. Rode down to Sheffield. Here I met a messenger from East Hampton on Long Island, who, by the unanimous vote of the large town, was sent to invite me thither, in order to settle with that people, where I had been before frequently invited. Seemed more at a loss what was my duty than before. When I heard of the great difficulties of that place, I was much concerned and grieved, and felt some desire to comply with their request, but knew not what to do. Endeavored to commit the case to God, unquote. The 2 next days, he went no further than Salisbury, being much hindered by the rain. When he came there, he was much indisposed. He speaks of comfortable and profitable conversation with Christian friends on these days. Lord's Day, March 18th, at Salisbury. Was exceeding weak and faint, so that I could scarce walk, but God was pleased to afford me much freedom, clearness, and fervency in preaching. I have not had the like assistance in preaching to sinners for many months past. Here another messenger met me and informed me of the vote of another congregation, to give me an invitation to come among them upon probation for settlement. Footnote. This congregation was that at Newington, near Haddam. They were very earnestly desirous of him coming among them. End of the footnote. Was somewhat exercised in mind with the weight and burden of care. Oh, that God would, quote, send forth faithful laborers into his harvest, unquote. After this, he went forward on his journey towards New York and New Jersey, in which he proceeded slowly, performing his journey under great degrees of bodily indispositions. However, he preached several times by the way, being urged by friends, in which he had considerable assistance. He speaks of comforts and conversation with Christian friends from time to time, and of various things in the exercises and frames of his heart, which showed much of a divine influence on his mind in this journey, but yet complains of the things that he feared, viz. A decline of his spiritual life, or of his acidity in religion by means of his constant removal from place to place and want of retirement, and complains bitterly of his unworthiness, deadness, etc. He came to New York on Wednesday, March 28th, and to Elizabethtown on the Saturday following, where it seems he waited till the commissioners came together. Quote, April 5th, was again much exercised with weakness and with pain in my head. Attended all the commissioners in their meeting. Footnote, the Indians at Ka-U-Na-U-Meek, being but few in number, and Brainerd having now been laboring among them about a year, and having prevailed upon them to be willing to leave Ka-Na-U-Na-Meek and remove to Stockbridge to live constantly under Mr. Sargent's ministry, he thought he might now do more service for Christ among the Indians elsewhere, and therefore went this journey to New Jersey to lay the matter before the commissioners, who met at Elizabethtown on the occasion, and determined that he should forthwith leave Ka-U-Na-U-Meek and go to the Delaware Indians. End of the footnote. Resolved to go on still with the Indian affairs, if divine providence permitted, although I had before felt some inclinations to go to East Hampton, where I was solicited to go. By the invitations which Brainerd had lately received, it appears that it was not from necessity or for want of opportunities to settle in the ministry among the English, notwithstanding the disgrace he had been laid under at college, that he was determined to forsake all the outward comforts to be enjoyed in the English settlements, to go and spend his life among the savages and endure the difficulties and self-denials of an Indian mission. He had, just as he was leaving Ka-Na-U-Meek, had an earnest invitation to a settlement at East Hampton on Long Island, the fairest, pleasantest towns on the whole island, and one of its largest and most wealthiest parishes. The people there were unanimous in their desires to have him for their pastor, and for a long time continued in an earnest pursuit of what they desired, and were hardly brought to relinquish their endeavors and give up their hopes of attaining him. Besides the invitation which he had at Newington, was near his native town, and in the midst of his friends. Nor did Brainerd choose the business of a missionary to the Indians rather than accept of their invitations, because he was unacquainted with the difficulties and suffering which attended such a service. For he had had experience of these difficulties in summer and winter, having spent about 12 months in a lonely desert among these savages, where he had gone through extreme hardships and been the subject of a train of outward and inward sorrows, which were now fresh in his mind. Notwithstanding all these things, he chose still to go on with this business, and that, although the place to which he was now going was at a much greater distance from most of his friends, acquaintances, and native land, after this he continued 2 or 3 days in New Jersey, very ill, and then returned to New York, and from thence into New England, and went to his native town of Haddam, where he arrived on Saturday, April 14th. And he continues still his bitter complaints of want of retirement. While he was in New York, he says thus, quote, "It is not the pleasures of the world which can comfort me. If God deny his presence, what are the pleasures of the city to me? 1 hour of sweet retirement where God is better than the whole world, unquote. And it continues to complain of his ignorancy, meanness, and unworthiness. However, he speaks of some seasons of special assistance and divine sweetness. He spent some days among his friends in East Hampton and Millington. April 17th, quote, rode to Millington again and felt perplexed when I set out. Was feeble in body and weak in faith. I was going to preach a lecture and feared I should never have assistance enough to get through. But contriving to ride alone at a distance from the company that was going, I spent the time in lifting up my heart to God. Had not gone far before my soul was abundantly strengthened with these words, quote, if God be with us, who can be against us, unquote. I went on, confiding in God and fearing nothing so much as self-confidence. In this frame, I went in the house of God and enjoyed some assistance. Afterwards, felt the spirit of love and meekness in conversation with some friends, then rode home to my brothers. And in the evening, singing hymns with friends, my soul seemed to melt, and in prayer afterwards, enjoyed the exercise of faith, and was enabled to be feverish in spirit. Found more of God's presence than I had done any time in my late wearisome journey. Eternity appeared very near. My nature was very weak, and seemed ready to be dissolved, the sun declining, and the shadows of the evening drawing on apace. Oh, I long to fill up the remaining moments, all for God. Though my body was so feeble and wearied with preaching and much private conversation, yet I wanted to sit up all night to do something for God. To God, the giver of these refreshments, be glory forever and ever. Amen. April 18th was very weak and enjoyed but little spiritual comfort. I was exercised with one who prevailed against original sin. May the Lord open his eyes to see the fountain of sin in himself. Unquote. After this, he visited several ministers in Connecticut, and then traveled towards Kamayumik, and came to Mr. Sargent's at Stockbridge, Thursday, April 26th. He performed this journey in a very weak state of body. The things he speaks of, appertaining to the frames and exercises of his mind, are at some times deadness and want of spiritual comfort, at other times resting in God, spiritual sweetness in conversation, engagedness in meditation on the road, assistance in preaching, rejoicing to think that so much more his work was done, and he was much nearer to the eternal world. And he once and again speaks of a sense of great ignorancy and spiritual pollution. April 27th and 28th. Quote, spent some time in visiting friends and discoursing with my people, who are now moved down from their own place to Mr. Sargent's, and found them very glad to see me returned. Was exercised in my mind with a sense of my own unworthiness. Lord's Day, April 29th. Preached for Mr. Sargent both parts of the day, from Revelations 14:4. These are they which were not defiled, etc. Enjoyed some freedom in preaching, though not much spirituality. In the evening, my heart was in some measure lifted up in thankfulness to God for any assistance. April 30th. Rode to Kananami, but was extremely ill. Did not enjoy the comfort I hoped for in my own house. May 1st. Having received new orders to go to a number of Indians on the Delaware River in Pennsylvania, and my people here being mostly removed to Mr. Sargent's, I this day took all my clothes, books, etc., and disposed of them and set out for Delaware River, but made it my way to return to Mr. Sargent's, which I did this day just at night. Rode several hours in the rain through the howling wilderness, although I was so disordered in body that little or nothing but blood came from me. Unquote. He continued at Stockbridge the next day, and on Thursday rode a little way to Sheffield, under a great degree of illness, but with encouragement and cheerfulness of mind under his fatigues. On Friday he rode to Salisbury and continued there till after the Sabbath. He speaks of his soul's being, some parts of this time, refreshed in conversation with some Christian friends, about their heavenly home and their journey thither. At other times he speaks of himself exceedingly perplexed with barrenness and deadness, and has this exclamation, quote, "Oh, that time should pass with so little done for God," unquote. On Monday he rode to Sharon, and speaks of himself as distressed at the consideration of the misimprovement of time. May 8th. Set out for Sharon in Connecticut and traveled about 45 miles to a place called Fishkill, footnote, a place in New York government near the Hudson on the west side of the river, end of the footnote, and lodged there. Spent much of his time while riding in prayer that God would go with me to Delaware. My heart sometimes was ready to sink with the thoughts of my work and going alone in the wilderness I knew not where. But still it was comfortable to think that others of God's children had, quote, wandered about in caves and dens of the earth, unquote. And Abraham, when he was called to go forth, quote, went out not knowing whither he went, unquote. Oh, that I might follow after God, unquote. The next day, he went forth on his journey, crossed the Hudson, and went to Goshen in the highlands, and so traveled across the woods from the Hudson to the Delaware, about 100 miles, through a desolate in his country above New Jersey, where were very few settlements, in which journey he suffered much fatigue and hardship. He visited some Indians in the way and discoursed with them concerning Christianity, was considerably melancholy and disconsolate, being alone in a strange wilderness. On Saturday he came to a settlement of Irish and Dutch people, about 12 miles above the forks of Delaware. Quote, Lord's Day, May 13th. Rose early, felt very poorly after my long journey, and after being wet and fatigued, was very melancholy. Have scarcely even seen such a gloomy morning in all my life. There appeared to be no Sabbath. The children were all at play. I, a stranger in the wilderness, and knew not where to go, and all circumstances seemed to conspire to render my affairs dark and discouraging. Was disappointed respecting an interpreter, and heard that the Indians were much scattered. Oh, I mourned into the presence of God, and seemed like a creature banished from his sight. Yet he was pleased to support my sinking soul amidst all my sorrows, so that I never entertained any thought of quitting my business among the poor Indians, but was comforted to think that death would ere long set me free from these distresses. Rode about 3 or 4 miles to the Irish people, where I found some that appeared sober and concerned about religion. My heart then began to be a little encouraged, went and preached first to the Irish and then to the Indians, and in the evening was a little comforted. My soul seemed to rest on God and take courage. Oh, that the Lord would be my support and comforter in an evil world. May 14th was very busy in some necessary studies. Felt myself very loose from all the world. All appeared, quote, vanity and vexation of spirit, unquote, seemed loathsome and disconsolate, as if I were vanquished from all mankind and bereaved of all that is called reassuredly in the world, but appeared to myself so vile and unworthy, it seemed fitter for me to be here than anywhere. May 15th. Still much engaged in my studies and enjoyed more health than I have for some time past, but was somewhat dejected in spirit with the sense of my meanness. Seemed as if I could never do anything at all to any good purpose by reason of ignorancy and folly. Oh, that a sense of these things might work more habitual humility in my soul, unquote. He continued much in the same frame the next day. May 17th, quote, was this day greatly distressed with a sense of my vileness, appeared to myself too bad to walk on God's earth, or to be treated with kindness by any of his creatures. God was pleased to let me see my inward pollution and corruption to such a degree that I almost despaired of being more holy. Quote, O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death, unquote. In the afternoon, met with the Indians, according to appointment, and preached to them. And while writing to them, my soul seemed to confide in God, and afterwards had much relief and enlargement of soul in prayer, and had some assistance in the duty of intercession. Vital piety and holiness appeared sweet to me, and I longed for the perfection of it. May 18th, felt again somewhat of the sweet spirit of religion, and my soul seemed to confide in God that he would never leave me. But oft times saw myself so mean a creature that I knew not how to think of preaching. all that I could always live to and upon God. May 19th. Was some part of the time greatly oppressed with the weight and burden of my work. It seemed impossible for me ever to go through with the business I had undertaken. Towards night was very calm and comfortable, and I think my soul trusted in God for help. Lord's Day, May 20th. Preached twice to the poor Indians and enjoyed some freedom in speaking, while I attempted to remove their prejudices against Christianity. My soul longed for assistance from above all the while, for I saw I had no strength sufficient for that work. Afterwards, preached to the Irish people, was much assisted in the first prayer, and somewhat in the sermon. Several persons seemed much concerned for their souls, with whom I discoursed afterwards with much freedom and some power. Blessed be God for any assistance afforded to an unworthy worm. Oh, that I could live to him, unquote. Through the remainder of this week, he was sometimes ready to sink with a sense of unworthiness and unfitness for the work of the ministry, and sometimes encouraged and lifted above his fears and sorrows, and was enabled confidently to rely on God. And especially on Saturday towards night, he enjoyed calmness and composure and assistance in prayer to God. He rejoiced, quote, that God remains unchangeably powerful and faithful, a sure and sufficient portion, and the dwelling place of his children in all generations, end quote. Quote, Lord's Day, May 27th. Visited my Indians in the morning and attended upon a funeral among them. Was affected to see their hedonistic practices. Oh, that they might be, quote, turned from the darkness to light, unquote. Afterwards, got a considerable number of them together and preached to them and observed them very attentive. After this, preached to the white people from Hebrews 2:3. How shall we escape if we neglect, etc. Was enabled to speak with some freedom and power. Several people seemed much concerned for their souls, especially one who had been educated a Roman Catholic. Blessed be the Lord for any help. May 28th. Set out from the Indians above the forks of the Delaware on a journey towards Newark in New Jersey, according to my orders. Rode through the wilderness, was much fatigued with the heat, lodged at a place called Black River, was exceedingly tired and worn out, unquote. On Tuesday, he came to Newark. The next day, went to Elizabethtown. On Thursday, he went to New York, and on Friday, returned to Elizabethtown. These days were spent in some perplexity of mind. He continued at Elizabethtown till Friday in the week following. Was enlivened, refreshed, and strengthened on the Sabbath at the Lord's table. The ensuing days of the week were spent chiefly in studies preparatory to his ordination, and in some of them he seemed to have much of God's gracious presence and of the sweet influences of his Spirit, but was in a very weak state of body. On Saturday he rode to Newark. Quote, Lord's Day, June 10th. At Newark in the morning, was much concerned how I should perform the work of the day, and trembled at the thoughts of being left to myself. Enjoyed very considerable assistance in all parts of the public service. Had an opportunity again to attend on the ordinances of the Lord's Supper, and through divine goodness was refreshed in it. My soul was full of love and tenderness towards the children of God, and towards all men. Felt a certain sweetness of disposition towards every creature. At night, I enjoyed more spirituality and sweet desire of holiness than I had felt for some time. Was afraid of every thought and every motion, lest thereby my heart should be drawn away from God. Know that I might never leave the blessed God. Quote, Lord, in thy presence is fullness of joy, unquote. Oh, the blessedness of living to God. June 11th. This day, the presbytery met together at Newark in order to my ordination. Was very weak and disordered in body, yet endeavored to repose my confidence in God. Spent most of the day alone, especially the forenoon. At 3 in the afternoon, preached my probation sermon from Acts 26, verse 17 and 18. Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, etc. Being a text given me for that end. Felt not well either in body or mind. However, God carried me through comfortably. Afterwards, passed an examination before the presbytery. Was much tired and my mind burdened with the greatness of that charge. I was in the most solemn manner about to take upon me My mind was so pressed through the weight of the work incumbent upon me that I could not sleep this night, though very weary and in great need of rest. June 12th. Was this morning further examined respecting my experimental acquaintancy with Christianity. Footnote. Mr. Pemberton, in a letter to the Honourable Society in Scotland, published in the Christian Monthly History, writes thus, quote, "We can with pleasure say that Mr. Brainerd passed through his ordination trial to the University approbation of the Presbytery and appeared uncommonly qualified for the work of the ministry. He seems to be armed with a great deal of self-denial and animated with a noble zeal to propagate the gospel amongst those barbaric nations who have long dwelt in the darkness of heathenism." Unquote. End of footnote. At 10 o'clock my ordination was attended, the sermon preached by the Reverend Mr. Pemberton. At this time I was affected with a sense of my important trust committed to me, yet was composed and solemn without distraction, and I hope that then, as many times before, I gave myself up to God to be for Him and not for another. Oh, that I might always be engaged in the service of God, and dearly remember the solemn charge I have received in the presence of God, angels, and men. Amen. May I be assisted of God for this purpose. Towards night, road to Elizabethtown. Unquote. End of chapter 5.